Let's talk women's football with Harriet Eastman from Southampton, Executive Director. If I get all these, because I've got so many introductions, if I get them wrong, please tell me. Executive Director of Saints Women's Football, Maggie Murphy, who's the CEO of Lewes FC, and Sarah Gregorious, Fifth Pro Director of Global Policy. Welcome all, how are you?
Very good.
Very well, thanks.
Very good.
Okay, please feel free to jump in at any time with the three of you. Is women's football in a good place?
Well, it depends. It depends what angle you're looking at, I reckon. I think that we're seeing a lot more visibility these days. That creates energy and passion and drive. It gets people interested and curious. I think that one of the key things around that visibility piece is that it provides a form of legitimacy to people that might have been skeptical in the past. And I think that includes parents all the way through to sponsors. So that visibility is really helpful for creating that space for people to kind of get interested and curious and maybe put their money where their mouth is a little bit. But my caution would be that if you don't have to scratch the surface too far to find out that we're all still pretty fragile and we're all still building something, and we don't have the huge, over 100 years of investment that men's football has had. So there's still some foundations that we're all building, I think.
Harriet, is Southampton women's team in a good place?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think in terms of kind of that sustainable growth, we're on that journey, and we've only been kind of going for the last 6 years. I'm really lucky that I've been able to be part of that journey. In terms of being a player to then transitioning into the boardroom. So to kind of see the steps that we're taking kind of bit by bit, these things don't happen overnight. But I think we're in an incredibly lucky place, and also I think a good, strong place to kind of kick on and compete in the league that we're in, as well as, further down the line as well. And I think as well, it's that importance of making sure that you're not, either pulling up the ladder once you've kind of grown through those, but also providing a sustainable future for those, so that you can leave the game in a better place than when you found it.
Sarah's in, what hotel are you in? You're on the hotel Wi-Fi, are you?
I'm at the Hyatt in downtown Montevideo, Uruguay.
Isn't that?
So I cannot vouch for it.
How is Montevideo today?
Sunny. Sunnier than Amsterdam when I left it yesterday, but I haven't been outside yet.
What are you doing down there?
We're here. We've got the Fifth Pro General Assembly. So once a year we bring all of the members together and we run them through several workshops and presentations for a few days, and just look back on the year and look forward to the coming one. And this year it's being hosted by our union in Uruguay, which is pretty cool.
I guess it's a domestic feel, if you like. But Maggie, how big a boost was the Euros and the success? Have you felt that on the ground at Lewes?
Well, I mean, funnily enough, we played Southampton in our first home game of the season, and we definitely had a bigger attendance than we had for the same game last season, our opening game. We definitely felt that there are more people that are curious and interested, maybe popping by, when maybe they wouldn't have thought about it before. However, we have seen attendances drop a little bit each time, not consistently, but it's dropped a little bit. And so I do still fear that even the new converts might still see women's football as the same as an event, as something they do every 6 months, or it's still going to be hard, I think, to build the habitual fans. Because I think it's still a little bit of a fun, entertaining one-off event. And I think what lots of us in the game are trying to do is build that more regular fandom. So I think that's probably where we're at the moment.
Harriet, I guess that's the key, isn't it? It's like sustaining it.
Yeah, I completely agree with the sentiments that Maggie's just said. It's in terms of it's really pleasing to see that boost of kind of attendances, but it's about how do we sustain that and keep the crowds coming. I think, our first home game against Charlton, we were really lucky for that attendance of over 2,400. But it's about, okay, the next home game, are we going to attract the same people back, or are they there for the, the spectacle of it, of,
first game of the championship. So yeah, I completely agree. It's just about maintaining that that kind of excitement around it and making it a bit more of a staple to people's lives in a sense, I guess.
Sarah, financially is I don't know, the success of the Euros, maybe the popularity of the women's game, certainly in Britain when it's televised and on radio as well. Are we seeing more money coming into the game?
Look, I actually think it's a little bit too early to say, because I think if you look to some of the real sort of flagship events, they've yet to be properly commercially unbundled, and we're starting to see that for the Women's World Cup next year. So I think, I don't know who said it earlier because of the dodgy Wi-Fi, but I think rather than just seeing like one-off commercial sponsorship come in or only affect a few players after a really, really big moment in the game or a milestone in the game, I think we need to wait a little while longer to see if it's more sustained. I think once we see it come along in a more sustained fashion, we start to really get transparency around the numbers, I think then we can make those comments. But I think for me, what I find challenging is it just comes in fits and bursts. And actually, we need to see it be a little bit more consistent, a little bit more sustained. I think people have to have skin in the game for a little bit longer and pull away a bit from just seizing upon these milestone moments as well. And I say that also to not just to the commercial sponsors and things like that, but also to the players and the federations and the leagues and the clubs around the game as well, is make sure you're in a really good position to capitalize on the success that you'll inevitably have. Because we know, like, we knew the Euros were going to be big. We know the Women's World Cup next year is going to be big. We know the WSL and the Championship and the other leagues around the world are going to keep growing. The only way is up. But I don't know if we've really seen people be fully prepared for it. And I think if everyone's prepared, then that momentum will be a little bit more sustained, and then we can make proper analytical commentary on the commercialization increase of sponsorship, because now it just feels like it's a little bit reactive. Like, yeah, that was really great, and everyone jumped on board, and then it's like, okay, do we just have to wait for the next great thing to come along, or can we make it a little bit more manageable over a longer period of time?
Maggie, is that a fair reflection of what happens at Lewis?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that to be really blunt, I only have one commercial sponsorship that lasts more than 1 year. So I have one 3-year partnership. So that gives me a little bit of sustainability, but we're always looking for that longer term commercial stability, because that allows us to plan. I think that the other challenge is one that is a little bit more structural and maybe a little bit more around how we want women's football to progress and to grow. And that's how clubs are trying to be different, be unique, have a selling point, get fans back. I think that there's a danger in a couple of places that there's an over-reliance on the men's side of the club to provide the funding that might take some of the innovation and difference out of what the women's club or what the women's team is able to do. So there could be a reliance on sponsors from the men's side, or just a budget line that's transferred over that for a big Premier League club, let's say, is probably not that much money to them, but is more than able to sustain a women's team. And I think that sometimes we see a lack of really strong matchday experience for fans that might also be the thing that stops people from coming back. I think that I would, I'm always going to say that I think at Lewis, we try and do things well. We try and do matchday experience well, but that's also because we have to. Because if we don't, that's it. I don't have a big budget line to lean into. And I do think that this is a bit of an existential question for women's football as to how reliant we want to be going forward on men's clubs to sustain football. Because if that's a decision, then, there's going to be smaller clubs like ourselves that won't be able to be part of that growth.
I was going to come back to it a bit later on, but while you're talking about it now, so say the WSL becomes independent money comes into it, you would think that the so-called, big six in the men's game sustain the big six in the women's game, which means a side like Lewis could get left behind.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing that to an extent. You look at Man United and Spurs, they were not in the top division just 3 seasons ago. They now are, and they're now featuring in that top 6, let's say. And even if you go back just 4 or 5 years ago, only 50% of the WSL teams were Premier League clubs, and this season it's 11 out of 12. So there already is a kind of Premier Leagueization happening, which is down to the funding and the speed at which we're growing, the speed at which the performance requirements are growing. And that makes it just really, really hard for some of us to be able to survive. So there is a little bit of a survive or die element and atmosphere, I think, with some of the smaller clubs that have to generate our own revenue. I think what we want, though, and what we would be looking for is that opportunity or that focus to be on how much profit we are making, or how much revenue we can actually generate ourselves as clubs, rather than every year the license requirements going up another notch, which is almost like a structural challenge for us, as opposed to just one about economics.
But at the same time, Harriet, at the moment, you look at the men's game and you've got the top six, and the top six are pretty much far away from everybody else. A lot of people don't like it, don't think it's a good idea. Is that something that could, one, happen in the women's game, and is that something that you should guard against at this particular point in time? I don't know how you do it, but should we be doing it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question in terms of, I think everyone, personally, I think everyone, I get the view or the impression that those that work in the women's game don't want to kind of make the same mistakes as those that we're seeing in the men's, because it becomes unsustainable. We see kind of breakaways such as a Super League, kind of ideas like that, which, nobody really wants. So yeah, it is an interesting one. It's that fine line of wanting to build the game and make it successful so that we've got it for years to come. But then it's also, you don't want those breakaways, because one, it makes the leagues less competitive, I think. And two, it becomes a product or it runs the risk of becoming a product that we've already got. And that's what makes women's football so special, is that it's different, and it's, you're still seeing elite athletes perform, but it's in a different, I guess, context, and it attracts different audiences. We've seen 60% of those that have bought season tickets are an audience that we've never seen before come to men's games. And you don't want to run the risk of kind of alienating them and leaving them behind as well, because, football is for everyone.
What's your sponsorship situation at the moment, Harriet?
Yeah, so I'm really delighted to kind of announce that we've got a new principal sponsor. So they're going to be announced at our Sunderland game, or they would have been announced at our Sunderland game. So that's Starling Bank. We wanted to kind of wait out for the right partner, because we've taken the view to not making the women's team a tag-along for our main club sponsors. The women's team, like I've mentioned, they're elite athletes in their own right, and they, warrant a price next to them that will be able to be invested into them. So yeah, we've partnered with Starling Bank. We're really delighted about it here. It's, we'll see kind of us be able to build a legacy on the Euros, because, they were a partner in that process too. But it also means that, like, as part of that partnership, we can kind of feed back into the pathway. So providing more resources and access for women and grassroots coaches. But more of that will be, I guess, announced as and when. But yeah, really delighted and really excited to work with them.
It's fantastic to see Soccerex back in Miami. We're incredibly honored to have them in our city, for them to be committed to coming to Miami on a regular basis and every time continuing to grow this fantastic event.
It's so nice to be back here and in person and around people again at an event where you have some of the most influential and important people in soccer in our region and from around the world. It's nice to see smiling faces and people that are back here and really enjoying it.
We needed this opportunity to get together, to talk to each other, to exchange ideas.
I think more than ever it's important. I mean, we've just come off almost 3 years of remote access and computer screens, and there's nothing quite like being in an event and the excitement and the buzz that you get from that.
I mean, it's just incredible, the crowd here from Central, South America, from Europe, from the Far East. It's one big family, one big party.
There looks to be a lot of good new innovative technology, which for me as a performance director and sports scientist is exciting for me to see how we can develop the game with different kinds of technology.
The face-to-face social interaction that has left us over the last couple of years, that's how relationships get formed, that's how connections get established, that's how business gets done.
It's interesting to learn and see the reality and not only, papers and, regulations, so it's great.
I mean, our industry is one big family, all trying to grow the game in whatever aspect of the business that we're in.
Is it a good thing that people like sort of Kira Walsh signed for £400,000 for you as a trade union representative, when I guess you have other players who are not so much coming to you, but are on a lot less than that? There's a big disparity.
No, I don't think it makes my job more difficult. I think it's a positive thing in the end, because it shows that there is money in the game. I think the transfer system, training compensation, we could spend like the rest of the day debating the merits of that system or lack thereof in the women's game. No, I do like the moments where it is demonstrated that, there is a lot of financial interest in the players too. I don't think that necessarily makes my job harder. It just means that you just can't hitch everything to that particular wagon, right? I think my job in FIFPro as an organization is so big and so global that we don't really get caught up in those types of moments. But I do like seeing them. I like seeing that there is that interest and that willingness to invest, and then all of these conversations about what type of return a club like Barcelona is going to get in that type of thing. But my job is hard enough, and that doesn't actually tend to make that much of a difference to it, to be honest.
Equal opportunities, equal payers, Lewis, which is well spoken about and talked about, Maggie, but I guess you couldn't afford £400,000 for a player.
No, I mean, that's, speaking very bluntly, it's probably not a surprise. That's more than my entire annual budget for my women's team for their player salaries by a fair way. And I think, and I agree with Sarah. I think for women's football, it's great to see the value being put on the table. It's great to see the growth. It's great to see that there are people out there that want to invest. For me, it's just about sustainability and how, from a Lewis point of view, how long we can keep going in an environment where other teams might not make the same level of revenue as us, but because of the money coming over from the men's team, it's going to be hard for us to compete. I guess I would want to come back to that point around how we can make money. Ultimately, it's bums on seats. Ultimately, it's people that take an interest, that want to be here. So I do think that we've got a lot of work to do to create this unique space, as Harriet was talking about, for these new audiences coming to football, to create something really special and unique and different types of content. There's so many things we can do differently. And I think that what you don't want is the mirroring the men's game, but with empty seats. And that is a danger, that just because it's easier to slide over some zeros into a spreadsheet for the women's team doesn't mean that people will come. And so you might have a product that's kind of empty of value and empty of purpose. And I think that's what Lewis FC stands for. We're trying to create value for our community here in Lewis, value for our communities online, value for our communities that believe in a better type of football. But it's a race against time to see if we can get the cash in.
Before I came on today, my bosses were saying it's all about talk about money. It's the business side of football, which sounds kind of a little bit callous at times. But Harriet, I wonder when Kira Walsh is going for £400,000, if that isn't incentive enough for one, young players to get involved in the game, and two, for your current Southampton squad to see what the possibilities are.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's here at Southampton, we've always maintained that we'd grow the club in the right way at the right time. And so for us, this is the first year that we've gone full time with our squad. And that, relates to putting them on full time contracts and all the kind of additional elements that come with that. But, I think for us, we've made the move at the right time for us. Barcelona are a beast in itself. And I think we'll see that pockets of that in the women's game. And I think as well, it's about what can you provide that player regardless of the salary. Sarah's mentioned it. It's the working conditions. It's, are you able to provide them with the right facilities? So, here we're incredibly lucky that, or not lucky because we're there in our own right, but, the squad have the same access to the same facilities as our men's players. And hopefully, an environment like that will, hopefully aid a decision of a player if we were to look to sign them, that, it's not just about the salary at the end of the day. We're fortunate that we're putting them on sustainable contracts, but it's that whole package as well. It's looking after the person, not just on the pitch, but off of it as well.
Sarah, do you wish you were starting out on your own footballing career now?
No. I don't know if I'd be able to keep up, to be honest. I think the game's advanced so rapidly. So when I started over 10 years ago, now I'm I love the job that I have now, and I'm beyond thrilled with what the industry is now providing players.
Do you know what? I hear what you're saying, but usually when you ask any pro, they go, "Oh, I wish I was starting out now." What kind of pressures are your members facing now that possibly you didn't face when you were starting out?
I mean, geez, I didn't have Instagram for one thing. I didn't have Twitter. I had no online presence. I was basically strong-armed into having it towards the end of my career. But I think that is the scrutiny is a different level now. I think women's football players get scrutinized at a different level. It's sometimes it's a little bit terrifying. I think the evaluation I make of it is sometimes it feels as if women's football players or women's athletes in general just get abused for existing, as opposed to getting abused for missing a penalty or anything like that. I think we saw it the last year as the players who had the massive celebratory in-game moments were the ones that suffered the most horrific online abuse. That wasn't around when I was starting. And I'm actually very grateful for that, because I really admire the courage and the bravery of some players to still use their platform and to still be activists and to still use the online space to push for things to get better. But it is such a, it can be really unpleasant and really awful.
Maggie, I just wonder, you speak to anybody who's been to a women's game or fan of women's football in general, and going back to a point you made before, I'm sort of surprised because I think it's the match day experience, which is one of the most positive aspects of it, and different from maybe the vitriol you sort of get from a men's game, certainly maybe from the crowd or whatever. How does women's football find its space? It looks to me for any sport that's very difficult.
100%, but only if you're thinking about it at a national level. And of course, people, the crowds that you saw and being at the England games, being at the final of the Euros and seeing how diverse that crowd was, and how there were young people, there were older people, there were groups of teenage boys, there were gangs of women, there was a huge, I found it extremely representative also of our national population, much more so than any men's football game you go to. However, this is at the national level. And yes, of course, it's going to be difficult to compete with all those high level things, but that's because it starts in the community. It starts at home. Who is coming from the local communities to their women's games? And I think this is my point. One of the hardest things, and, I travel with my team to away games, and I have to say there's been a couple of times when I've felt a bit sad for the opposition team because the facilities that they have on match day were not good enough in my point of view. And I kind of mean for the whole fan environment, not just the players. Some of the pitches are poor, but the facilities, the food outlets are terrible. I went to a place and at halftime went to go and grab some food because I like to test what it's like in other places, and it was closed at halftime. What? I mean, it was just pretty miserable in some of these places. But the core reason for this is that a lot of teams are just renting a facility. So the women don't play at their home grounds, which means that when you rent a facility, often you rent the food outlets that come with it. You rent the security outside, who sometimes don't even know who they're playing. And so you rent this kind of thing, which then kind of can be a little bit hollow unless you invest in that whole match day experience. And I think we have to remember that we have to start at the community at home. Who are you building into your environment? Who do you want to be coming in, day out? And so, of course, it's going to compete, but we're talking at different scales here. We need to start back at our own grounds and our own communities.
Can't beat the hospitality of the dripping pan, eh?
Well, I'm just saying, if you haven't come and had loaded fries or a nice vegan pie and some local brew, then you're missing out.
Harriet, you've got to play at the bigger stadiums. You've got to get full-time refs. It's the way forward, isn't it? It's shown if you play at the bigger stadiums, the crowds are much bigger to start with.
Yeah, I'd agree, but I'd say there's a line to that. When we made the decision as to where our women's team were going to play this season, we went back and forth because we've built a really good relationship with our local team, AFC Totton, where we'd been playing our matches from tiers kind of 5 upwards before we got promoted. And we'd built a really nice kind of environment there. And it was a local pitch that, community members could come and watch the team. So you didn't want to lose what we've built there. However, on the other hand, there's that kind of discussion about, the famous saying of build it and they will come. And I think we were seeing, and we saw it last Monday when we played Birmingham, in that we'd had to limit ticket sales because we played at AFC Totton because our season ticket holder numbers were larger than the capacity of the ground, which is brilliant because that's what we want to see is increased kind of crowd sizes. But then you didn't want people to miss out coming to see the team because, Totton might be a more convenient location for them versus the stadium. So, we were when we went back and forth in discussions,